Alrighty then. Uh, I'm going to try and beat the clock to get in my last recording. I'm a little bit behind on getting the resource page up that I had intended. However, I have a topic. This is sort of part two of the philosophy section. Uh, yes, pause. As I was saying in part one of the section on philosophy, which is the last two videos of my challenge, that philosophy really, from a practical point of view, from a nuts and bolts, what is it really point of view, is what you use to make sense of the world, how you expect it to work, and what kinds of assumptions you make about how it works. Now, one of my favorite philosophers, and one of the philosophers that I feel is grossly misunderstood and misrepresented, is Friedrich Nietzsche. And you'll see by the time I'm done talking about him here, how his philosophy kind of feeds in to our theme of know yourself, formulate a vision, and take action. Be all you can be. Nietzsche's position was that there are a lot of illusions and conventions that obstruct us, that make it harder for us to see the possibilities of human potential, of becoming all we could be. And the way he talks about this is he says, there's humanity as we are now, and there's overcoming our limitations, our present state, moving on to something higher, something better. This is what he calls the Superman. Nietzsche was actually very cosmopolitan fellow. He believed in Europe as sort of a single culture. It has its variants, yes, but in his works he borrowed words and concepts from Italian, French, his native German, the English. One of the things about the English, though, was he was never very fond of what he referred to as the English psychologists. He thought that they had sort of a slightly warped view of human nature and what humanity could be. He was very much opposed to this whole idea of persecution based on, race or ethnicity. So actually, he was sort of a natural enemy of the Nazis. However, in his later years, and he didn't live extremely long, but in his later years, he had contracted syphilis as a college student and was totally unaware of it, and it started eating his brain, and that was kind of the end for him. However, his sister dressed him in white, put him in a wheelchair, rolled him around, and twisted and warped his ideas to be servants of the folks who were anti-Semites and about to take control of Germany as National Socialists. This was kind of unfortunate, and he gets a bad rap for that because they say, oh, the Superman, and they're thinking of the Aryan, the superior Aryan German illusion, myth that they wanted to try and make reality or claim was reality. Nietzsche would have been very much opposed to this. Nietzsche's whole thing was, man is something to be overcome. And the way to do that is to recognize those things that we hold that are illusions or mere conventions and move on to something more inclusive, something higher, something better. His his best work, according to many, and I'm kind of inclined to agree, although it gets a little tedious in spots, is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he lays out his whole conception of the overman and overcoming ourselves and moving on. But he also, in the process, describes what he calls the last man. And if Nietzsche is right in his estimation of the last man, humanity ends with a whimper, not a bang. That's perhaps unfortunate, but he may have he may have been a little bit extreme in his assessment. And one of the things that I noticed about Nietzsche is that he has a lot in common with the cynics in certain ways. And a cynic basically is a person who's critical largely because he still cares. He doesn't want to give up hope, but he's not impressed with what he sees either. And Nietzsche is much like this. He described himself as philosophizing with a hammer. He looked at the illusions and the conventions that he considered to be sort of obstructions, not necessarily obstructions in that they were not useful to society, but obstructions in that they were illusions. They were not true. They kept us from seeing things clearly. One of them, he goes to great lengths to discuss this very kind of point in one of his books called Beyond Good and Evil, and he takes the moral conventions of the day, and he says, he was a philologist. He studied languages, the origins and developments of meaning in words from various languages, and back tracing them through sometimes different languages in their evolution. And he came to the conclusion, based on his philological background, that most of the words we use to describe things as being good or bad, good or evil, you might say, basically derive from linguistic conventions that ascribed, whatever was a good quality or good behavior to the ruling class, and things that were bad qualities to the lower classes. So in a way, good and evil became more or less class distinctions. You could be just as upright and conscientious and moral as the next guy, but if you were a member of the lower class, you were always suspect. You're a potential criminal, and that, to a certain extent, is still true today. Although there are many out there who would say, "Oh, no, it's not like that at all." Well, it is, still to a large extent. Sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's not. There are all kinds of issues with things like profiling, for example, which unfortunately has also become often become, not always, but often become connected with race. Profiling is a problem, but unfortunately, even if you look at it in our worldview, our scientific materialist worldview, in terms of statistics, very often profiling is justified. Not in every case, and certainly as a blanket policy, it's, it has its problems. Let's put it that way. It has its problems. Sometimes it does promote or preserve a certain amount of racism or classism. By classism, I mean that same distinction Nietzsche was talking about, where the terms that describe good things are associated with the upper classes, and those that describe bad things, bad habits, bad, living conditions, bad choices, bad moral values, whatever, are associated with the underclass, with the lower classes. And in fact, another thing that kind of reflects this is that the whole concept of any kind of hands-on labor, and we still have a hangover from this today, in many respects, was considered to be somehow not appropriate for anybody who had any of any quality, of any class. And that's one of the things that held back the Industrial Revolution and the economic development of many of the more Catholic and aristocratically controlled governments in Southern Europe. Again, part of the worldview. It's like, oh, you work with your hands? Well, that means you're lower class. There's, you're right down there with that stuff I don't want to get on the bottom of my shoe. You're useful, but, you're just not on the same plane. So the whole idea of an aristocrat becoming connected with labor of any kind of hands-on labor, didn't matter if it's, industrial, agricultural, shops, crafts, whatever. It was it was considered to be inappropriate, and so, of course, most of the people with the means who could acquire an education and things like that, no, they didn't. They didn't go in that direction. They went in the direction of politics, diplomacy, literature, and war, because those were the things that were appropriate to real people, the upper class, basically. And Nietzsche doesn't explore all these topics in his Beyond Good and Evil, but you get the impression. I mean, he's pretty clear about his position, and so he says, let's be real about this. Let's look at this illusion, this misrepresentation of what's going on here. There's, let's look at it for what it is. It's basically the language of class distinction. It's not necessarily anything intrinsically moral in terms of one's character or quality, but a convenient illusion that keeps the lowers down and the uppers up. And again, the whole emphasis, the whole thrust of Nietzsche's philosophy is that, well, we're something to be overcome. We can do better. But to be all we can be, to get beyond where we are, we have to deal with some of these illusions, some of these obstructions, if you will. And he used to, one of the things he said he did was he philosophized with a hammer. He would strike the idols and see whether or not they cracked. Usually they broke right up under his hammer. He had, he was pretty, pretty devastating, verbally and in print. And from him we get the famous quote, "God is dead." What was he saying by saying God is dead? He was not saying that God, spirit, and higher aspiration are gone. He's saying we're blind to it. We killed our connection with God. or the gods, or however you want to look at it. There's a lot of variance in terms of spirituality these days. So then I'm not going to put it in a box, but I'm going to say that Nietzsche's statement, God is dead, basically referred to our tendency to cut the divine, the spiritual, out of our lives, and to make it something more distant, something less accessible, and something less valuable. Is it? Well, I mean, I think it's valuable, but that's me. there, there are many different opinions on that, and one of the same theme of I can almost talk. Yes, the same theme of making the divine, the spiritual, mundane, basically, or just something not considered, is a theme that also comes up in several authors who discuss things like the philosophy of history, and even some of the more I'm trying to remember the authors, because there are some authors who really go over this theme, and give some really nice, insightful examples of how we have managed to demystify, despiritualize, dispense with divinity, you might say, in our scientific materialist philosophy and outlook on life. Now it's like these things are, it's superstition, or it's just off the wall, or it's not compatible with science, and it's not surprising that as a result of these kinds of attitudes, there's a strong trend of atheism. Now, I don't care a lot for the conventional religions, but I respect them. There are at least some people in each of them, and we would hope that their general intent is still to make that connection between the human and the divine, the matter and spirit, so to speak, and to help us realize that we are more than just matter, and that there are potentials both spiritually and materially and intellectually that are possible for us to attain. And it's a matter of us finding the will to be all we can be. Will is another thing that Nietzsche explores considerably. And personally, I believe that the will is quite important. However, I'm running out of time, and this concludes the last video, the last video of my challenge. As soon as I can, I will have the link to at least the first version of my resource pages up, and from here on out, I will be doing these videos like once a week instead of twice. It should let me be a little bit more prepared in my presentations, and to give me the time to organize, allow me to organize my time better, so that the backup things that I keep holding out there saying, yes, I'm working on these, well, I don't want to do that to you anymore. I want to deliver. We'll see. I'm going to do that as quickly as I can, and you will continue to see my videos, but instead of one a week, instead of two a week, you will see one. Uh, except maybe there may be some exceptions to that, but yeah, for the most part, one a week. Okay, so until sometime next week, uh, have a great evening. It's night where I am, and I look forward to finally delivering some value to you in terms of links and books and things like that, and my resource pages. They're not quite there yet, but I'm still working on it, and I will finish it as soon as possible and have a link up for you, hopefully under the next video. So thank you for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.